Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, I suppose, for some of you. Welcome back. I hope you had a fantastic Chinese New Year, or at least had a long break, which is what I did. I'm obviously not Chinese. I didn't celebrate Chinese New Year. Gets a little boring as a Westerner. You know, we've just had International New Year, then we've got the Chinese New Year, then we've got Khmer New Year to look forward to. I actually enjoy Khmer New Year. I like how everybody gets so overexcited about it, and everybody enjoys it, and everybody has Khmer Christmas, I guess. It's just like everybody having fun, and it's I like that. But Chinese New Year, it's fun to have a day off. I mean, don't get me wrong, but that's all it really means to me. But I hope you had fun. My wife went away, which was fun for me. I'm sure you understand. But now we're back with a whole new section in the book. And today we're going to go through the new section in the book. Tomorrow I'll probably do an analysis of the exam, which was a bit of a mixed bag, I'll be honest. I thought, when I actually saw the exam, I thought it was very easy. And judging by some of the scores, some of you didn't bother. Let's just put it that way. You know you are. Well, you don't, because I'm probably only speaking to the people who did bother right now, because it's pretty clear that some of you were asleep through the entire first semester. And that's how it is. So, we're going to go to Unit 5. So if you've got, well, you have your books by now, I would hope. So page 143, Text for Performance. So, let me go through this. I'll do the introduction, and I'll explain and I'll elaborate and tell you what this is all about. So, Unit 5, Texts for Performance, unit outcomes. By the end of this unit, you should be able to listen for similarities and differences. I would hope that at this point in your evolution, you should be able to tell what's alike and what is different from other things, and in what way. This is something people struggle with today, especially in the modern post-fact world, you know, where people are trying to move beyond the evidence that we see with our eyes. The best example of this would be the whole liberal thing where gender is a spectrum, where science says, well, no, it absolutely isn't. There's male and female. A very small minority of American idiots say, no, it's a spectrum. Men can be women, men can have babies, and we're all looking at them, scratching our chins, thinking, what? Crazy stuff. Similarities and differences. I mean, some things are alike, some things are not alike. Often we compare the two. Chalk and cheese would be the most obvious metaphor, where we apply the concept that chalk and cheese are so different that they can't be compared, and we actually use allegory that compares the two things together. It's like chalk and cheese. And the two things are completely different. We use that as an example of how we're comparing two things that don't work. They say it's like comparing apples and oranges. But of course, they're both fruit, so they're very easy to compare, even though they're very different, because it's all about how we're looking at things, how we frame things. You can't compare apples and oranges if you're talking about citrus fruits. Apple juice is very different from orange juice. They have completely different qualities. For instance, they're quite similar in many ways. In Poland, for instance, they drink vodka with apple juice, which is frankly disgusting. And in America, they drink vodka with orange juice, which is equally disgusting. I don't know which one is better or least disgusting, but they do compare quite well together, because these are both fruits, they are both juiced, but at our core, we understand that apples and oranges are very different, and we use them for different things. They're just very, very different, even though they're actually very similar, because it depends how we look at them. If we were comparing fruits, then of course we can compare apples and oranges. But if we were comparing the ideal ingredients for an apple pie and someone gives us an orange, it would be ridiculous. You can't cook an orange because they're so different. But really, if you look at it another way, they're very much the same. So it very much depends, when we're comparing things, why we're comparing them and what we're hoping to understand from the experience. As an example, my wife was eating something the other day. She was eating steak or something, and she was, oh, this is delicious. I said, okay, what does it taste like? And she said, well, I can't compare it to anything. So you're going to have to, because I can't eat it because I don't eat meat. So I've got no idea what this particular thing tastes like. Tell me what it tastes like and try and compare it to something. And she couldn't. She had no frame of reference. So you can't compare it to something else unless you've got those frame of references. And it totally depends on what you're trying to get out of the experience of the comparison. So similarities and differences are very important, but they're only important in the way we are perceiving them. So read and understand a play script, a sitcom script, song lyrics and poetry. So that's what the core of this is. We're actually talking now about scripts. Now scripts are very important, and I know it sounds frivolous to some of you. You know, you're trying to learn English, you're trying to build a future. Why are we looking at performances and scripts? How ridiculous. But to a degree, much of what we do is scripted in our lives. We work out a script in many, many things that go way, way beyond entertainment. I would argue that a job interview is scripted. You know, the interviewer definitely will have a row of questions and the experience behind them. And those row of questions will formulate a script. One of the most impressive examples of this I ever heard was a man gave a lecture on ancient Greek writings, the Iliad and the Odyssey, Homer's great works, which are these two enormous books, the Odyssey and the Iliad, these two separate books that basically tell very similar stories. And I think they lead into each other. They're certainly set in the same world. And this man gave a lecture on them that lasted for hours and hours. He went on going through all the metaphors, all the symbolism, all the details of these two stories. And apparently afterwards, a student went up to him and said, that was the best lecture I've ever heard on the subject. Can I have a copy of your notes, your script? And he went, well, I don't think it'll help you, but you're welcome to have a copy. And he gave him a copy, and it just said, Iliad, Odyssey, and that was it. It just had those two words, just so that he could remember the titles, and that was all he needed because he understood the thing very well. But most of us need a much more detailed script than that, and scripts are very important. They go into a lot of detail because, again, this is a way we communicate ideas from one person to another, but in a script we're doing it in a different way. We're doing it in a planned out layout so that somebody else, a performer, can take this information and make sense of it so that they can then get a better idea of what the person who wrote it wants from them. I've said this before, when I write a novel, it involves two people, give or take editors and feedback and all that kind of stuff. The novel involves two people. Me, the writer, I put down the ideas, I encapsulate everything I want to say, and I present my book. And then the reader reads it, and every reader will get a completely different experience from the book. Everybody reads a story differently. They have a different idea of who the main character is, what the situations are, what the background is. They imagine things differently because they're a unique individual. So each book comes out differently. Movies don't do that. When we see a film, which of course, or a play is based off of a script, everybody involved brings something of themselves to it. So we end up with this group effort. We have somebody that writes the script, then we have a group of producers that come together and they put the money in, and each one of them will want something from this story. So the script will be modified and adjusted accordingly by the people who are paying for the movie. Then you'll have a director, and that director will have his idea or her idea of what this movie is going to look like. And the producers will usually choose a director who they think can do a good job of presenting it. Usually a producer, the money men, are not very creative people, and they won't have a very good idea of what this film should look like or how it should be presented. That's the director's job. So they'll present a good director with a good history, and they'll say, this is what we want. That director will then go out and get a casting director who will go out and find the good people to be in the movie. And each one of those actors and actresses will bring their own unique personalities to these characters. They'll work with the director and they'll polish it so that it works and everything comes together. But eventually, every single person involved in the movie brings something of themselves to it. So we end up with something that is more than any one person could have created. And that's a fantastic thing. Years ago, I actually watched a cartoon, an animation about a zombie, and it was just a little animation, and all the zombie story was told out in this animation, and it was all made by one person, because computers have reached the point where we can do that. One person can now create an entire movie, but should they? It doesn't work. It really doesn't work, because it's one person's view, and they're not going to be good at all those different things. As an example, for instance, there was an old 80s horror film called The Reanimator, which was about Frankenstein. It was about a guy that creates this green glowing chemical which you can inject into a human body, and that body will come back to life. And it was a horror comedy, so arms were coming back to life, heads were coming back to life in jars. It was nonsense, but it was very, very low budget. And they said the special effects looked terrible, they were all rubber, it looked horrible, so they poured blood on everything, that didn't work. So what they did is they spent the money not on more special effects, but on a good lighting man. So the man came in with the lighting and he knew exactly how to light the studio and the set so that the bad special effects didn't show up. He said they hid things behind curtains and then used the shadow to hide the rubber. And he said it worked perfectly because they hired a guy who knew how to light the set properly. So every single person involved, even the man turning on the lights, has a role to play in bringing a story to life in terms of a movie. And the script is the foundation and the beginning of that. But it is only the beginning. It's usually spun off from, usually these days, from a book or a comic book or something else. But a script is a development and it's the foundation that we build these stories on. Now, real life is a story. You're living your story now. One day you'll be dying and you'll be laying on your deathbed and you'll be looking back, and your life will be a story with a beginning, a middle and an end. And it will be, as you realize at the end of your life, scripted. You write the script yourself, but it is a script. So understanding that and understanding how these stories work is important for how we live our lives, and it is important going forward through small details like passing exams, going through interviews, going through meetings, all that kind of stuff is scripted. So understanding how these scripts are put together is a valuable life lesson. Use grammatical features associated with text for performance, of course. Use stage directions and understand emotive language. Yeah, emotive language is important. It's been taken way out of context these days. The use of emotive language is about controlling people's emotions, making them feel something that they might not necessarily be feeling in any other way. The liberals, the Democrats in America are very good at this. We hear them saying things like, climate change is coming and it's going to kill everybody. And now we've got these teenage kids going, oh my God, the world is going to end. What are we going to do? And then we had COVID and everybody was locked up. And all of a sudden, all the rivers were clean within a week because people weren't chucking garbage in them. And we started to realize, hang on a minute, this isn't quite making sense. And then, in the 1980s, we were talking about global warming and the oceans were going to rise up and we were all going to drown. And there were movies about this. And then, of course, none of that happened. And you can look at photographs of oceans. They're in exactly the same place as they were in the 80s, exactly the same. And Obama, who's been saying, climate change, we've all got to change our lives, otherwise we're all going to die. Very emotive language. And then he went out and bought a beachfront property. It's all nonsense. But emotive language controls the way people think. That's why we're selling all these fear stories all over the news. You never hear good stories anymore. You never hear about, this changed for the better. We never see this. And we see people selling garbage. We see people selling this emotive nonsense by telling you, it's going to be so good for you, and it never works. There was an American company, Theranos. They were selling a little patch that you would wear on your skin, and it would take a single drop of blood and it would search through the blood for any diseases, and then it would give you the medicine back through this patch. So you could walk around all day, you could put your patch on in the morning, and it would check to see if you were going to have any problems, and then it would treat you immediately. Made $9 billion. The company made $9 billion within a year or so. It was ridiculous. Woman in control, feminists were coming and saying, this is what happens when you put a woman in charge. It's fantastic. $9 billion worth, and this new technology is fantastic. And of course, a year or so after that happened, it turned out that it was all fraud. There was no technology behind it. It wasn't possible. It was all garbage, and it had all been emotional nonsense. The company value went down from 9 billion to zero overnight. The woman in charge of it, I can't remember her name off the top of my head, she's now in prison where she belongs. It was all nonsense, but it was all sold by emotive language. Elon Musk is very good at that. We're going to go to space. We're going to go to Mars by 2020. We didn't get to Mars in 2020. And now SpaceX, I think they crashed their latest rocket. Didn't hear about that on the media, but it did, it crashed. And they're in real trouble. They're almost bankrupt. The Hyperloop, it's going to go around the world. We're going to go at 1,000 miles an hour underground in pressurized tunnels. 5 years later, we've got a 100-meter tunnel that can't work, that doesn't work. And that's raised billions of dollars around the world, these Hyperloop plans, because they're selling it emotively, and people have learned to think emotively. And when you think emotively, you're not thinking intellectually. So nobody is applying these grounded scientific and reasoning thoughts to these ideas. So, of course, we're being overtaken by this absolute nonsense. And that's what we see around the world. We're seeing people think emotionally, let's have more diversity. Why? Because it's fair. Well, what does fair mean? And people can't answer that. They don't know. Why do we want diversity? Don't know. Right? Because it's emotive. You've been sold it emotionally. And people are stupid. I'm not saying that people are born stupid, but people have been dumbed down by this nonsense being drilled into them. And it's their own fault for accepting it. Work in a group to perform a play or recite a poem. I really don't know what's going to happen going forward. Now, I'm shooting this video during well, it's kind of a break. So I don't know what's to expect, but everyone was back for the exams. Obviously, nobody died. Obviously, this is almost over now. I mean, it's done. COVID is done, I think, I hope. Touch wood. It looks like it's done. All that's left now is a couple of people who just don't know how to get past the fear, emotive language. So hopefully this is over now. Hopefully you're all going to be coming back. So hopefully this is going to be doable. We could actually do a play. Now, a few years ago when I did grade 11 before, I've done grade 11 3 times. First time was live. That was fantastic. Second time, it was all locked down and we couldn't really do anything. And this time, we'll see how it goes. Last time, we weren't allowed to put on a school play. That was the idea. I wanted to do that with the other grade 11 teacher. This year, the other grade 11 teacher probably won't be interested in doing anything that makes him stand up. But we'll see. We'll see. They wouldn't let us do it. They said it was too disruptive. And at the same time, all the students were going out to watch football matches, which is just, well, you decide how that is. So, okay, we didn't do that. We ended up making a film, and I made sure it was really, really disruptive. I bought a camera, and I got every class to write a script and write a play and perform the play, and then we stitched them together into a movie, and we made a film. But it wasn't very good, obviously, and we lost it. But it was fun. It was fun to do, and most of the classes impressed me. So we'll see if we can do something like that. If everyone comes back, we'll see. It was actually really fun to do. Everybody got involved. Everybody had fun with it. One class they came in with costumes. They brought their own cameras. They edited it for themselves. They made a really good job of it. So we'll see what happens with that. Group work is very important. And I can see your exam results, and it shows why group work is so important. Working together in a team, that's what school is all about. That's why you're here. That's why we have schools, to get people together, to cause a very human need for competition. Without that, you're failing. And I can see this. I can see you're all sitting at home on your computer and you've got no one to compete against. You've got your scores, but they're meaningless. They're just numbers on a page. You don't care about those. So what I've seen is a massive decline in educational quality. We need to get people back in this building so that you can compete. It's a human need. We need to compete. Work in a group to form a play, recite a poem. Probably not recite a poem, it's really boring, I don't like poetry. Think in creative ways. Not many of you are very good at that, but we'll work on it and we'll try and come up with some sort of creative solution to problems. Write a narrative as an outline for a script. Well, we'll see if we get a chance to do that. We'll do something along those lines. We'll see where we go. I don't know what to expect depending on whether you come in or not, and we'll see what happens. You're the only campus that doesn't. Almost all the other campuses now are fully attended. It's this campus that doesn't. Your age group does seem to be the problem. So overview, page 144. Plays, film scripts, song lyrics, and some poetry are written for the stage. They're meant to be heard by an audience. That's true. And this is very interesting in the way that we teach this stuff in England. In English schools, we learn the two greats of English literature, Charles Dickens and William Shakespeare. Now, Charles Dickens was only in the Dickensian era, so the Victorian era, and he's very well recorded through history. We have photographs. We know exactly what he looked like, who he was. We know all about him. Shakespeare's a bit older, hundreds of years older, and we really don't know much about him, even to the point of whether or not he really existed. I'm not joking, we don't know. There is a rumour, legend, that maybe he didn't exist. Maybe it was a group of people working together, and that was just what they called themselves, Shakespeare. And there's a lot of evidence for that, because we really don't know. What we do know is that I've never met someone called Shakespeare. It doesn't exist. That name is gone. And somebody as famous as that, normally people name themselves after them. So Will Shakespeare, the name has disappeared. I've never met a Shakespeare, ever, in England. And I lived there for 35 years. I've never met one. So who knows? Maybe it was just a made-up name. Who knows? Now, Dickens was he was a playwright as well, but he mostly wrote novels, and they were taught very, very badly in Western schools. I remember being taught in English class some of Dickens' work. What was the one? There's lots of them that we're taught. One of them that sticks in my head was Great Expectations, which I thought was an absolutely terrible novel. I hated it. I was like 12 or 13 when it was rammed down our throats, and it was taught very badly. Our English teacher, I remember him now, Mr. Marshall. Everybody thought he was just some homeless guy that had wandered into our school. He looked terrible, he smelled bad, and he just didn't care. You know, he just sat behind his desk, flies buzzing around his head, reading this stuff to us, and then just go and do some work, I don't care. That was very much how it was done in our schools. So not a very strong experience for us. But what he used to do is he would sit there, and this was normal, this was how it was taught. Sit there, and we'd read a couple of paragraphs of this book, then he'd stop and he would talk about it, and he would explain, this is why it happens, look at this, and then he'd go off and he'd be showing us grammatical symbols and words, and we'd all lose interest. You can't read a book like that because you don't get invested in the story, you don't have a chance to let the story come to life. And a book needs to do that. I don't believe a group can read a book. I think a book is a very personal experience where one person hallucinates. Literally, your imagination becomes free and you vividly picture these events and stories happening, these characters walk through your mind. And this is meant to happen. This is how books work. And this is why you guys aren't readers. You spend so much time looking at your phone that you're replacing imagination with artificial, external imagination. We're externalizing your reality instead of internalizing it where it belongs. Your imagination is meant to be inside your head, and it's making you dull. That's why you don't have creative thought processes, why you don't come up with solutions to problems for yourselves, because you're so used to Googling it instead of thinking, how does this work? And that's why the world is failing, because you're taught to do this. Google, your phones, these things give you solutions. They tell you what to do. GPS is the same. Instead of learning how to get somewhere and working out how things fit together, GPS tells you what to do. So you never work out where things are. You never need to. You rely and trust on someone else to do it for you. It's very dangerous to the human condition. And this is the outcropping of it. We see chaos all around the world where no one knows how to do anything anymore except to obey orders. So Dickens was taught very badly, so I lost interest in it. Then, years later, one of my goddaughters was studying Dickens at school. And she didn't know how to put this book together. She had to write an essay about it. I went, okay, let's go through it. And I was much older at this point. I was in my 30s. And I read through it. I thought, you know what, this is actually very well written. So I started reading more, and yeah, this was great. And the story made sense, and suddenly it came alive. There was metaphors, there was layers of hidden symbolism. And she got straight A's. Her essay was the top of the class. Everyone was like amazed at her. She went from being an average student to an amazing student because I worked one-to-one with her, I made her read it, I read it too, and then I showed her how it was all working, and we let the story come alive, and yeah, it was fantastic. It's just taught very badly. You think that's bad, Shakespeare is 100 times worse. I don't even remember what. I mean, I know we did Macbeth, and I know we did several others, but I only remember Macbeth. And I only remember Macbeth because we were allowed to watch a movie of Macbeth in school. That's the only reason I remember studying Macbeth. Now the problem with this is you can't read a script. You don't know how to read a script. It's a skill that you don't have yet, because it's a skill that you need to learn over time. And to put that in perspective, actors are very bad at reading scripts too. You look at someone like Johnny Depp. Johnny Depp is very, very good at reading scripts. And from that, I mean, people send him scripts and he decides whether or not to do the movie. Johnny Depp hasn't done many bad movies. He's usually very good. He can look at a script, he can imagine how the film's going to look, and he can work out what to bring to the script and whether or not he wants to do the movie. He doesn't do many bad movies. Then you've got someone like Bruce Willis, who just rubber stamps, yep, that's fine, I'll do it. And he reads the script and he doesn't really understand it, so he does a lot of terrible movies. And that's the difference. That's what I mean when I say you can't read a script. You can read the words, but they don't make sense to you because it's a skill that you have to develop over time, and it takes a long time to do that. Not many professionals are even very good at it. That's why we have directors, because most people aren't good at this. I wouldn't even know how to turn one of my books into a script, because I mean, I could do it, but whether I could do it right or not, I honestly don't know, because I've never tried to do it. I've never worked with a cast. I would need a director to work with me to direct me into doing what I need to do to get that to work. So it's a skill that I don't have yet, and it's a skill that most people don't have. But the way Shakespeare is taught in schools is we present these scripts to these kids in a classroom and we get them to read the script. Just read it. And it makes no sense to us because we can't imagine what the play is supposed to look like. And Shakespeare only wrote plays and poetry, and it was all performance art. None of it was meant to be read by school children in a classroom. And that's why everybody grows up hating Shakespeare. I guarantee, by the time we reach your age, everybody in England hates Shakespeare. We hate it. And I did too. And it was only when I was able to see plays performed that I started to appreciate the genius of Shakespeare plays. They're fantastic. There are loads of movies that are written based on Shakespeare plays. Macbeth is the obvious one. Every few years there's another Macbeth comes out. There's another Taming of the Shrew, another Tempest. Romeo and Juliet has been done to death. And these things, they come out all the time and they're fantastic because that's how Shakespeare was meant to be enjoyed. It was meant to be watched and experienced. Shakespeare built a performance centre. It was a playhouse called the Globe, and it was literally a big circular building with the stage at the front and the audience all wrapped around it. You were involved, you were part of the play, you were involved in the performance, you felt like you were really there. And that was what it was all about. You can't read a script, a Shakespeare script, and appreciate it. It's a skill that you're not going to learn. This chapter is not going to instill in you the ability to appreciate and enjoy reading a script. It's not going to happen. It's something that's going to take you years and years to master. So that's what a script is. Now, a script functions by having lines of text where the players would read them out, and it will have stage directions that will tell you where to go in relation to other people. And it's very hard. Whenever we've done this in class, and you'll notice there's some in grades 7, 8, 9, 10 even, and now 11, where you'll read a script and you can perform it, and almost everybody screws it up. Yeah, everybody's standing around, no one knows what to do, they're reading it, they miss their lines. It's very hard to actually follow a script. Being an actor is more tricky than you think. We all laugh at bad actors who just turn up, read the script and look at the camera. But even getting to that point is still a skill that most of us wouldn't be able to do. I could point a camera at you right now and say, right, act this, and you'll look away, you'll be shy, you won't know what to do. So even getting to the point where you can act on stage in front of your peers is still a gift. It's still a skill that a lot of us would have to work hard to ferment and develop. So play scripts and film scripts are narratives. So it's a story. So what we're doing is we're talking about taking a story and turning it from one format into another. Now, an example of this would be Fight Club, which is a fantastic movie. I love it. I watched it a few weeks ago with the wife. She loved it. Now, this originally was a book called Fight Club. Somebody read the book and thought, this is fantastic, we should make this into a movie. The book was handed around. Bunch of producers in Hollywood saw it. Most of them said, no, this is a terrible idea. It's a great book, but it won't work as a movie. And eventually they got David Fincher, who's a fantastic director. He's not just a visionary, he's very grounded in reality, but also very creative. He took on the project and he made a fantastic movie from it. So he understood how to take this book and turn it into a script and then turn the script into a movie. And it was a big process. And that's what we're talking about here. Taking an original narrative, a story that goes in the normal way of a story, beginning, middle, end, tells a story, takes a character from here to here or backwards. Stories can go in any way, in any direction, so long as they make a point. But a story has to be a story. There has to be a point to it. You're taking not necessarily the characters on a journey, we're taking the audience on a journey through our story. It doesn't really matter what happens to the characters so much, so long as there is a narrative that takes the audience from A to B and gives them a good, entertaining ride along the way, and they walk out of either of the cinema or of the playhouse or put down the book and feel like it was time well spent. That's the point of a story. They're not meant to be propaganda. I'm not meant to be teaching you how to change the world. They're meant to give you some ideas, they're meant to inspire ideas, and they're meant to give you fun while you're doing it. And that's why none of you are readers. A horrible fact of the publishing industry today, 98% of books will not make a profit. That means that the publishing industry in America, as it stands, and England, as it stands today, has a 98% failure rate when it comes to selecting books worth publishing. So if they're that out of touch with an audience, of course, books are crap. And you've grown up thinking, oh, books are rubbish. And they are, mostly. And that's the sad fact. Mostly books through the mainstream media have a 98% failure rate. That's why you're not interested in books. They've been devalued and devalued to such a point. And we've moved on to movies. And that's okay if the movies had value. They rarely do. And I'm sure you understand what I'm talking about. It's rare that a movie comes out that's actually worth watching, that actually takes you on a journey, stimulates a little idea in your head, and gives you a fun time. You should walk out of the cinema smiling and wanting to talk about the ideas embedded in the movie. Not be propagandized at, be preached to about diversity or any of that rubbish. You should have an enjoyable time. You're paying your money to be entertained. And movies have forgotten that. They think that they're the ones who should be selling you the idea, and it's not that way around. Poetry has been written to be performed, and song lyrics can be seen as a form of narrative, as they can tell a story or express ideas that appeal to the emotions. There used to be things like sonnets where, people would get up and they would tell poetry to an audience. It's very hard to do that correctly. It's very hard, as you can see, it's very hard for one person to stand up in front of an audience and make something interesting. There are YouTube channels that do this, that have one person telling a story and it works, but it's rare. It takes a very charismatic person, a confident person to be able to express themselves clearly, directly to a camera or an audience, so that the audience is actually invested and interested in what they're saying. Most people can't do it. An example of this would be news broadcasts. Most of us turn off the news because they've forgotten to make the news fun. It doesn't have to be funny, but it has to be amusing, it has to be interesting. And we don't make the news interesting. We have these boring people in suits, very blandly looking at a camera, reading what they see on the auto cue, and it's all very abstract. It doesn't feel like we're involved in the story at all. Can you imagine the news if it was told by two fun people talking about the stories? So we had pictures in the background saying, oh, a cat was stuck up a tree and they blew up the tree, and we're talking about that live and we're showing videos and the guys are laughing and going, oh my God, couldn't they think of a better way to do this? And then we have people actually discussing this. You'd watch that, but you don't watch the news the way it is because it doesn't feel real and you don't feel like you're involved or part of it, and the people talking to you are not people you would ever want to speak to in real life. So we've moved too far away from reality to make this apply to you in any meaningful way. So play scripts have the following features. Now, you've seen them before. I don't know why they do this in these books. You've seen them before. There's plenty of material going through the book about scripts, performing plays. You've done it before. I've done grade 7 a few years ago. I had one class of grade 7 that I had to pick up. And we did plays in that. There was a thing about rocks or stone soup, an old Russian play about putting stones in a soup in water and then adding vegetables. Oh my God, this came from stones. And I made the kids perform it. They loved it. It was a great day. It was a good lesson. So I'm sure that most of you have done this at some point. There was Frankenstein as well, where we would do a couple of scenes from Frankenstein. So yeah, I'm sure you've done this before. I'm sure it's not completely new to you, but Scripts have the following functions: a theme that the whole story is based on. Now, this is true of any narrative. There's a lot of narrative work in this book. Now, I'm a big fan of narratives. A theme that the whole story is based on would normally be... There's going to be multiple themes in almost every story. Take Little Red Riding Hood as an example. The main theme in that is listen to your parents. That's why the original story of Little Red Riding Hood, at the end of it, Little Red Riding Hood herself is killed and devoured by the wolf. The wolf represents real life, and she's got the riding hood. She's got the red hood up, which means she can't see out the sides. She only sees forwards, okay? And that's how you are in childhood. You're not old enough yet to be able to see the world around you. You only see what you want to see, so you have to listen to your parents because they understand the dangers. The girl didn't. She followed the path. She did what she wanted to do. She stopped. She did all the stupid stuff that her mum told her not to do, and there were consequences. Her grandmother was killed. Ultimately, she died as well. That's the story. The theme of that story is listen to your parents because you only see what you want to see. You're not old enough to understand that the world is a dangerous place. So the wolf in these stories always represents danger, reality, out there, coming to get you. So that has multiple themes as well. It's got themes of family, it's got themes of connectedness, it's got themes of danger of animals and of reality and strangers. Do we trust strangers? So there are multiple things going on in any story like this. But they always have a point. A good story will have a point. I saw, as an example of the opposite of this, I once watched a movie, a science fiction movie. I like sci-fi movies, and it was a really low budget indie movie. And I tried to give them a go. If I can, I'll give them a go. But the real reason I downloaded it was because it had a motorbike in it I wanted to see on the screen. It had a Zero electric motorcycle, which I'd never seen in real life. They were only big in America at the time. I'd never seen one outside, never seen one in Cambodia. So I thought, yeah, let's watch this movie and check it out. And it was kind of interesting. The main character was a soldier. He had a hole drilled in his head and a little computer put in it. And sometimes he'd take the computer out and the computer would talk to him. And at the end of it, he finds the computer on a beach and just smiles and looks at it and walks away. I think, what the hell is this? So I looked it up, I Googled it, and there was a very small amount of people talking about it. And the director said, yeah, we left the end open, so it doesn't mean anything. You have to come up with your own meaning. That's not how stories work. If you didn't know what you were writing, then why even bother getting out of bed and doing it? That's not how stories are. I saw another one, a very strange story from England about this girl who takes this weird job, and it was just a bunch of scenes, and there was no connection through the scenes. And then again, I looked it up, and it was very well made, and that was the annoying thing. It was very well directed, brilliantly acted, but there was no point to any of it. And I looked it up, and they said, oh, no, there's no point. We just made these scenes and put them together, and you have to construct it into a story. No, that's stupid. That's stupid, and you're assuming the audience is stupid. That is not how stories work. You're lazy, and you think you're clever, but you're not. And the reverse of that is there's this cartoon show called The Simpsons, which most of you have probably heard of. And The Simpsons was always laughed at. It's a child's thing. And there was always a cutaway in McBain, where it was this character that mocked Arnold Schwarzenegger and action movies in general. And you used to be able to watch an episode, and occasionally there'd be a TV on, and you'd see a little clip of McBain, and the audience would laugh at it, and we'd move on. And it turned out that through every single episode of The Simpsons that had a McBain clip in it, all the McBain clips tie together into a movie. You can actually clip all of those scenes out and watch a story unfold. And that's clever. That's somebody putting in the effort versus people not bothering. So yeah, a play or a movie should have a good story. It should have themes, it should have characters, and it should come to life in your imagination. A setting where the story takes place. I don't want to kill this, I don't want to go into too much depth here, but yeah, there are 3 ways to look at settings. Now I helped Seth, my colleague, write a book about narrative structure, and there are 3 basic foundations for the setting of a story. You can set it in the real world. So I could tell you this story is set in London, and that gives you the impression that this is going to be a realistic story because it's a real place. Or I could tell you it's set in the capital city of this country, in which case it would be less realistic, but cities are capital cities, and you know it looks gritty. So I can see it's a little more fanciful. It's not absolutely real, but I can see that it's realistic. And then the other one is just to have no setting at all. So you know it's fantastic. It's all set in fantasy, it's imagination. And we can have those 3 different layers. So we've got stories like, take Fight Club, for instance. That's set in New York City. And it tells you, this is New York City. So it's trying to tell you this story could happen. It's realistic. These characters are based on people who are very much like you or I. This could actually happen. Then we've got, there was a soap opera called EastEnders in England, and it was set in Walford. And that sounds like Walthamstow or any of the other places in London that I used to come from, but Walford is a made-up place. So it tells you it's set here, it's semi-realistic, but you're not meant to take it absolutely seriously. It looks like reality, but it's not reality. It's a soap opera. And then you've got other stories where the name of the place isn't really mentioned because it doesn't really matter. Fantasy stories do this. I don't know, not Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is very different. That has a very, very, very strong setting. But you've got stories like fantasy stories, The Mask, for instance. And that's an old movie with Jim Carrey. It's a comedy film, and they called it the city. They just called it Edge City. So it's not really a real place. It's not meant to be a real place, and that tells you this is not meant to be a realistic story. It's all comedy and fantasy. So we have a setting, and the setting tells us a lot about what the story is going to be, and vice versa. A lot of people think they can just create any old setting and it doesn't matter, but it does matter because it tells the audience a lot about what to expect. And if the audience is told by the setting to expect realism and then the story doesn't give realism, then the audience is going to be pulled out of the movie and it's not going to feel realistic. You have to build the world that you put your story into, and you've got to choose it correctly. You've got to understand how all these things fit together, and a lot of movie creators these days don't. They don't know how to write a movie. Characters who interact with each other, well, obviously that's real life. I would argue, and again we do this in the book, I would argue that even an action movie which relies on punching and shooting and people running around, I would say that even that kind of movie would have 90% people talking to each other. Because that's how we move things on, because that's reality. 90% of our lives is sitting around talking to each other. Mood that develops in each scene, well, of course, human emotion help to tell a story. We're all emotional creatures, well, most of us. Conflict that the characters are dealing with. Conflict is very important in a story. Well, I would argue that it's actually essential in a story. There was an old TV show called Star Trek, and it was set in a utopian world where we've solved all of our problems and we're off flying around in space. So there's no more poverty, there's no more disease, there's no more bigotry or bias. We all work together, we're all the human race now, and we're not even the human race. We're out there in space and we're working with aliens, and everyone's happy. And Gene Roddenberry, the man who made it, said, this doesn't work. It doesn't work. So we did this story, but we need conflict. We need some kind of drama to drive the story. Otherwise, we don't have a story. So we need conflict. So he created vicious aliens, and our heroes are going out there trying to stop the vicious aliens from killing or hurting anybody without doing anything too evil to them. They're not going to blow them up or anything, but they're not going to let them get away with killing people either. So we need conflict to make our stories work. Action, as characters react to one another. Yeah, we can't just have characters talking to each other eventually, because that doesn't work. You're not a computer. You're not a brain floating in a jar. Ultimately, you understand that you have a body because you have to interact and you have to react with things. Part of your life is picking up things and working with them. That's why I don't like phones and digital equipment, because it gives you the impression that you can just sit down and be passive and do nothing. And that is not what you're designed to do. You're an interactive creature living in this physical reality. So you're supposed to be physical. You're supposed to get up and play football or drive a car, go out and do something in the real world. That's how we are. That's why we have coffee shops. I could, for half the price or a third of the price, I could take a coffee home and drink my coffee. But I prefer to go to the coffee shop and hear people talking and meet other people. And humans do. We like going out. A climax where the action is most exciting. We need a climax. We need our story to build up to something. As a terrible example of this, I used to like the old Clint Eastwood Dirty Harry movies. I grew up with them. And he's this policeman who's very aggressive and violent. And all the way through, building up and building up to a showdown, and there would always be a big showdown at the end where Dirty Harry would fight the bad guys after the bad guys revealed themselves to him. And every movie, every single one of them, was horrendously anticlimactic. You know, so you'd build up to this thing. So all the way through the first one, for instance, he's fighting this serial killer, this serial killer. But they've already fought several times, and he's already beaten him several times. He's better than this character. He's fighting him better than this character. He's beaten him over and over and over again. And then at the end, they fight one more time. But we've already seen it. It doesn't go any further. There's nothing new. And the climax always felt really flat to me. So although I liked the movie, I liked the character, and it was well written, and it was funny, but it just didn't work because it never had a good climax. The climax always came down to something that really felt like the beginning of the movie rather than the end of it. It just didn't feel like we added anything special to it. There was no new rising odds. So a climax has to rise those odds. It has to give us something before, and it has to feel like we've led to this big surprising action scene. And a resolution or conclusion. Well, the conclusion is the climax usually. The resolution, where things end. So taking Dirty Harry as an example, we end up with this big shootout, and of course he kills the bad guy. And then he sort of walks to the edge of the water, and he takes his police identity off, and he throws it in the water, because he said, you know what, I can't do this anymore. Yeah, I'm a murderer, I'm a killer, I'm just as bad as he is. They don't want me doing this anymore. And he throws his ID away, and he just says, you know what, I've had enough. This isn't me anymore. That's the resolution. That's where we leave our character. So he's done the climax, such as it is. It sounds interesting. You know, he shoots him and kills him. They have this big conflict. It really isn't, because we've seen it all before. But the interesting resolution where he takes his star and he throws it into the water, and then the camera just pans out, and he just stands there looking at the water. And that's a good place to end it. The resolution, because we've now seen that our character has been changed by the experience, and we're leading off into a new tomorrow. And that's what they should do. Okay, we're actually running out of time, so I'm going to have to leave. Language is obvious anyway. Possible use of tenses in dialogue. So we've come to the end of the introduction. So that's what a script is, and that's what we're going to be looking at. So basically, we're going to be looking at taking a narrative story and changing it from a paper story into a performance. We're going to look at how people take a story written down into a story that is presented as if it was a new reality. And that's what a movie should do. It should take you into a new world, a new reality, and present it as a possible fact for you to go in and learn your new experiences as if you were reading them off the pages of a book. So we'll leave this here. Maybe tomorrow we'll do an analysis of the exam, which I thought was pretty straightforward. We'll see. So that's it for today. No assignments. I hope you listened to this. I hope you enjoyed it rather, and I hope you learned something from it. Probably did if you listened. Probably didn't if you didn't. So I will see you tomorrow. Thank you for listening, and goodbye for now.